You know, it's funny. CBD oil, right? It's like everywhere now.
Right.
But it used to be this like, health food store kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I have to say, for as popular as it's gotten, I feel like there's still a lot we don't know.
Yeah.
What's actually in the bottle.
Yeah.
And like, does it actually live up to all the hype?
Uh-huh.
So that's what we're going to be, doing a deep dive on today.
Oh, scary.
All about CBD oil, cutting through the noise, trying to figure out what's what.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are kind of in that same boat where, they hear about it, they see it everywhere.
Right.
But maybe they're not really sure, like, what it is exactly or how it works. So hopefully we can clear some of that up.
Exactly.
So to start with the basics, when we talk about CBD oil, we're talking about an extract. And that extract comes from the hemp plant. And this is where I think some of the confusion comes in, because a lot of people, they hear hemp and they think marijuana, right?
Right.
They're very closely related.
The cousins or something?
Yeah, exactly. They're like, different varieties of the same species, cannabis. But the crucial difference is in their chemical makeup, specifically the levels of certain compounds called cannabinoids.
Okay, so is it kind of like a CBD is just like THC light kind of thing?
Not really, no. And that's a really common misconception.
Yeah.
See, THC or tetrahydrocannabinol, that's the cannabinoid that gets you high.
Yeah.
That's the psychoactive one that everyone associates with marijuana. But CBD or cannabidiol is different. It doesn't have that same psychoactive effect. So you're not going to get high from CBD oil.
Okay, that's good to know. I think that's a big one for a lot of people. But if it's not about getting high, then what's all the hype about? I mean, people are putting this stuff in everything.
It's true. It's everywhere. And I think a big part of the interest comes down to the fact that CBD interacts with our body's endocannabinoid system, or ECS for short.
What system?
The endocannabinoid system.
Okay.
Yeah. Most people, they've never even heard of it, but it plays a really important role in keeping our bodies in balance. Think of it like a master control system.
Okay.
That helps regulate a whole bunch of functions. Sleep, mood, pain, inflammation, you name it. And CBD can actually influence how that system operates.
So it's not like CBD is targeting one specific thing in your body. It's more like it's working with this larger system.
Exactly. Instead of targeting one specific receptor or pathway, it's kind of like CBD is giving a gentle nudge to this whole system.
To try to bring it back into balance.
Exactly.
Okay, so that makes sense, I guess.
Yeah.
But here's where I start to get lost, right? Because when I go to the store and I'm looking at all the different CBD products, it's like full spectrum, broad spectrum, isolate. It's like, what?
It can get pretty overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
Especially with all the jargon. But don't worry, it's actually not as complicated as it seems. It all comes down to what's actually in the oil besides the CBD. You see, hemp doesn't just contain CBD, it's got a whole orchestra of different compounds. Other cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids.
So it's like a symphony in a bottle.
Basically. And so a full spectrum CBD oil is like getting the full symphony orchestra. You're getting all those compounds working together in harmony. And yes, that even includes a tiny amount of THC, less than 0.3%, which is the legal limit.
Okay.
But the idea is that with all those compounds working together, you get something called the entourage effect. Basically, they all work together. They might enhance each other's effects.
So it's not just about the CBD, it's about how it all interacts.
Exactly. It's like the difference between listening to a solo artist versus a whole band. You might enjoy both, but the full band gives you a richer, more dynamic experience.
So in theory, if you're looking at, like, let's say, sleep or anxiety, a full spectrum oil, you're saying, might be more effective than like a CBD isolate, for example.
That's the theory, yes. Now, a broad spectrum oil, that's like a smaller ensemble. It's got a range of cannabinoids, but it's THC-free.
Okay.
And then you've got your isolate, which is pure CBD. It's like we've isolated the lead singer from the band.
Okay. I'm starting to see how it all fits together now, but how do they even get these oils out of the plant in the first place?
That's a great question. And there are a few different methods, but one that you'll hear about a lot, especially with high-quality brands, is CO2 extraction.
Okay, CO2 extraction. I feel like I've seen that on labels, but I don't really know what it means.
Yeah. So CO2 extraction, it sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty straightforward. It uses pressurized carbon dioxide, which is CO2, to basically extract those beneficial compounds from the plant material. Think of it like, brewing coffee, right? You want the essence of the coffee beans without getting the grounds in your cup.
Yeah.
So CO2 extraction, it's kind of like that. It pulls out all the good stuff, all those cannabinoids and terpenes, without using any harsh chemicals or solvents.
So you're getting a cleaner, purer product, essentially.
And that's really important because you don't want any of those nasty solvents or residues in your final product.
Right. Makes sense. But, okay, here's the thing, right? There are so many CBD brands out there.
Oh, yeah, it's a booming market.
How do we know which ones are actually, the good guys? How do we make sure we're not getting scammed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And you're right, there are definitely companies out there that are more interested in making a quick buck than in providing quality products. But there are ways to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak.
Okay.
And it all comes down to one really important thing: transparency.
Transparency. Okay, I like it.
Hmm.
So how do we, the humble CBD consumers, how do we know what to look for?
Well, the gold standard, really, when it comes to CBD quality is something called third-party lab testing.
Okay.
And basically what this means is that a reputable CBD company, they're going to send their products to an independent lab
Got it.
to get analyzed by experts.
So it's like a surprise inspection, but for your CBD oil.
Yeah, pretty much. These labs, they don't mess around. They're testing for all sorts of things.
Like what? Give me the rundown.
Well, first and foremost, they're going to be checking the actual levels of CBD
Okay.
and all the other cannabinoids that are in that product.
Making sure it's what the label says it is.
Exactly. Because you'd be surprised, sometimes what you see on the label isn't exactly what's in the bottle. They're also looking for things you definitely don't want in there.
Okay, like what? Like impurities and stuff.
Exactly. Things like pesticides, heavy metals. Sometimes, depending on the extraction method, there might be trace amounts of solvents left behind.
Right. You don't want to be ingesting that.
Definitely not. So these third-party lab tests, they're really there to protect the consumer and make sure that what you're getting is both potent and pure.
Okay, so that all makes sense. But how do we know the results of these tests? Do we have to call up the lab and be like, "Hey, can I get a copy of, test number?"
It's actually a lot easier than that.
Okay, good.
Any reputable brand should provide what's called a certificate of analysis.
A certificate of analysis.
Yeah, it's also known as a COA, and it's basically like a report card for that batch of CBD oil.
Okay.
So they should have that readily available. Usually it's on their website. Sometimes you can even scan a QR code right on the product and it takes you right to it.
Okay, so it sounds like if a brand is being weird or shady about their testing, or you're digging around on their website and you can't find the COA anywhere.
Yeah. If you're not seeing that transparency,
Big red flag. And speaking of transparency, remember earlier we were talking about all the different cannabinoids?
yeah, we were looking at the Hempex website and they were talking about their process.
Right. So they mentioned, not just CBD, but things like CBG, CBDA.
Right. And then there were even those terms, isolates and distillates, which I definitely want to dig into.
Yeah, absolutely.
But first, let's talk about CBG and CBDA, because I feel like every time I think I understand CBD, then there's a new acronym thrown at me.
It's true. There are a lot. It's like the alphabet soup of cannabinoids out there.
Right. So what are CBG and CBDA, and why should we care about them? So think of it this way. CBD, CBG, CBDA, they're all members of the same family. They're all cannabinoids, but they each have their own unique properties and potential benefits. We've talked a lot about CBD, but hemp actually produces a whole variety of these compounds.
Okay.
And CBG, now this one's pretty interesting. It stands for cannabidiol.
Cannabidiol.
Yeah, and it's actually considered to be a precursor to both CBD and THC.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of like the parent molecule.
Okay.
And while research is still, relatively early on CBG, there's some pretty exciting findings suggesting that it could have some really remarkable neuroprotective properties.
Neuroprotective meaning?
Meaning it might be able to protect our brain cells from damage and degeneration, which is huge, especially, when we think about age-related cognitive decline, conditions like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. There's a lot of research going on in that area right now.
So CBG, potentially a brain booster.
It's possible. It's still early, but, there's definitely a lot of promise there. And then you've got CBDA, which stands for cannabidiolic acid.
Okay, so CBDA.
Right. And this one's kind of cool because it's actually the acidic precursor to CBD.
So it's like CBD in its raw form.
Exactly. When hemp is growing, it actually produces CBDA first. And then, through a process called decarboxylation, that CBDA is converted into CBD.
Okay, so with heat, right?
Exactly, yeah. Like when you smoke it or vape it. But here's the thing. Some studies suggest that CBDA might actually be even more potent than CBD. Yeah, when it comes to certain benefits, particularly for inflammation. So there's a lot of interest in CBDA right now for things like arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, even just general aches and pains.
Interesting. So in a way, is it kind of are we missing out by just focusing on CBD?
That's a good question, and I think that's something that researchers are still trying to figure out, right? Like, what is the role of all these different cannabinoids, and how do they work together? But it's definitely an area of active research, and I think we're going to see a lot more about CBDA in the coming years.
Okay, so we've got all these different cannabinoids, but then there were those other terms on the website, isolates and distillates. What are those all about?
Right, so think of isolates and distillates as ways of concentrating cannabinoids. An isolate, just like the name suggests, is a pure extract of a single cannabinoid. So a CBD isolate would be, 99%, sometimes even higher, pure CBD.
So no other cannabinoids, no terpenes, nothing.
Exactly. They've basically isolated that one specific compound.
Wow. So it's like taking just the lead singer, putting them in a studio by themselves.
Exactly. And distillates, they're also concentrated, but they're a little bit different. They often contain a blend of cannabinoids and sometimes terpenes.
Okay.
But it's not necessarily the full spectrum of what you'd find in a full spectrum oil. It's like they've taken a few different instruments, but not the whole orchestra.
Okay, so why would somebody choose an isolate or a distillate over a full spectrum oil? Because, we talked about the entourage effect. Doesn't that seem like the way to go?
Right. And for some people, it definitely is. But sometimes people want a more targeted approach. So, for example, if someone is specifically looking for the potential benefits of CBG for brain health, they might choose a CBG isolate.
Makes sense.
Or, let's say a manufacturer is creating a sleep aid product.
Okay.
They might opt for a distillate that's really high in CBN, which is another cannabinoid that's known for its sedative effects. So it really allows for more targeted formulations.
So it's about tailoring the experience to people's specific needs.
Exactly. It gives consumers more options and more control over their CBD experience, which I think is really cool.
It is really interesting. Okay, so we've talked about what CBD oil is, how it's made, how to choose a quality product, but I want to dive into the science a little bit because we pulled some excerpts from a research paper about cannabinoid acids.
Okay.
And I have to admit, some of it went completely over my head. But one thing that I kept seeing over and over again was this term, icosanoids.
Icosanoids.
I'd never even heard of them before.
Yeah, it's not exactly a household word, right?
What are they?
So icosanoids, they're basically signaling molecules.
Okay.
And they play a really crucial role in regulating inflammation in the body. Think of them like messengers that tell your body when and where to create inflammation.
Okay.
And they're involved in a whole bunch of different processes, not just inflammation, but also things like pain perception, immune response, even blood clotting.
So they're like the body's internal fire alarm system.
Yes, that's a great analogy. And what's really interesting is that some research suggests that CBD, and particularly CBDA, might be able to influence how these eicosanoids operate. In other words, they might be able to modulate the body's inflammatory response. So instead of just masking the symptoms of pain and inflammation, CBD might be able to actually address the root cause by kind of calming down that internal fire alarm system.
Wow. So instead of just putting Band-Aid on it, it's, going to the source.
Potentially, yeah. But it's important to note that this is just one piece of a very complex puzzle.
Of course.
Right? There's still a lot that we don't know about how CBD interacts with the body, and more research is always needed.
Right. But it's pretty amazing to think that we might be on the cusp of unlocking entirely new ways of managing pain and inflammation. And it all comes back to these cannabinoids.
It's true. And I think that's what's so exciting about this field is that we're really just starting to scratch the surface of what's possible.
It really feels like, we're just at the beginning of something potentially really groundbreaking.
I think so.
With all of this, we've covered so much ground talking about what CBD oil is, the different types, how it's made, the science behind it. But I'm curious, for our listener who's at home, they're listening to this and they're like, okay, this is all very interesting, but what does it actually mean for me?
Yeah.
What are some key takeaways you hope they walk away from this conversation with?
Well, I think first and foremost, I would say approach CBD with a healthy dose of curiosity, but also a little bit of skepticism, right?
Yeah.
Don't believe everything you read on the internet.
Right.
Just because it's, natural or plant-based doesn't necessarily mean it's a magic bullet. And I think another really important takeaway is understanding that CBD oil is not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Right.
There are so many different types of products out there, different formulations, different concentrations.
Full spectrum, broad spectrum.
Exactly. Isolates, distillates. And each of these has its own potential benefits and, potential drawbacks as well. So I think, doing your research, understanding what those differences are, can really help you make an informed decision about what's right for you as an individual.
Right. So it's all about like being an informed consumer.
Exactly.
And a big part of that is making sure that you're choosing a quality product. So any last tips on that front? How do we make sure we're not getting scammed?
Yeah, absolutely. Look for brands that are transparent about their sourcing, about their extraction methods, and especially about their testing. We talked about those third-party lab tests.
Right, those COS.
Exactly. If a company's not willing to share that information with you, that's a red flag.
Right.
And, don't be afraid to reach out to companies directly, ask them questions, get a feel for like their knowledge and their commitment to quality.
So it's like any other product that you're putting in or on your body, you want to know what you're getting.
Exactly. Do your research.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. Thank you so much for walking us through the world of CBD oil. Before we go, though, any final thoughts? Like, what are you most excited about when you think about the future of this field?
I think what excites me the most is the potential for personalized medicine. Right. As we learn more about how all these different cannabinoids interact with our unique endocannabinoid systems, I think we're going to see a shift from this kind of like one-size-fits-all approach to something much more customized and targeted.
So instead of just, here's your standard CBD oil, everybody gets the same thing, it's more like, hey, based on your genetics, your lifestyle, your specific needs.
Yeah.
This is the blend that we think would work best for you.
Yeah. I think we're going to see CBD products that are tailored to specific conditions, specific individuals. And that's really exciting because it means we can potentially get even more targeted and effective results.
That is exciting. So really, we're just at the very, very beginning, it sounds like.
Yeah, we're just scratching the surface.
Well, on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. As research into CBD and other cannabinoids continues, what if we discover that the key to unlocking our health and well-being lies within these really remarkable plants? Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.